Today on That Guy with the Glasses, I'm going to attempt something completely original and something different, something that's never been done before, especially on this website. I'm going to take a look at one of my all-time favourite movie series and do a positive review on it. Now, taking this bold step in my evolution as a critic and a video reviewer, I figured it best to contact the people at Channel Awesome to make sure they were okay with me doing this. So I went straight to the top. None of that middleman stuff. I went straight to the top and spoke to the big cheeses. My bosses, to find out if they were okay with me doing this. I sent them a message and I'm expecting a reply any time now, because communication is the byword here at Channel Awesome. Any minute now.
You'll see him in your nightmares, you'll see him in your dreams. He'll appear out of nowhere, but he ain't what he seems. You'll see him in your head on the TV screen. Hey buddy, I'm warning you to turn it on. He's a ghost, he's a god, he's a man, he's a guru. You're one microscopic cog in his catastrophic plan, designed and directed by his red right hand.
You know, I've been thinking, and it's very tricky to write your first intro for your first review, which this is for me. It's my first major review. I say major, makes me sound really big-headed. But some people open with a joke, some people open with a catchphrase, and some people open with a theme song and music video. Me, I've kind of gone for all three. Well, except the joke. Hi, I'm Welshy, from Wales. Not Sad Panda from France, which some people seem to get confused by. Welshy, Panda, Panda, Welshy, Welshy, Wales, Panda, French, French accent. Honest to God, Rob, why do people get so confused between me and Sad Panda? Oh, sorry, this is Rob. He's my monkey. He has a bit of trouble telling me and Sad Panda apart. Don't you, Rob? Yeah, exactly. Anyway, I'm Welshy. And I fucking love Scream. So yeah, by that intro you can probably tell that this isn't going to be a critique of the films, with the fourth one being released on the 15th of April 2011. I timed these reviews so you can watch Scream 1 now and then Scream 2 and 3 after the release of 4. Why? Well, I'd like to say it's because I had a grand plan, but it's more for the fact that I let work pile up and my March videos became my April videos. So sue me. Now I know a lot of you out there are probably looking at this and thinking that this whole style of review is very similar to Dina and her Game Den, in that I'm doing a positive review on a movie that I love. And you'd be right. However, I totally anticipated the name-calling I'm bound to get for doing this, calling me an original and telling me to get my own idea and then I'm a rip-off. So I contacted Dina and asked her if she was okay with me doing a positive review on a movie that I love. And she was fine. Weren't you, Dina? Thank you, Dina. Now, enough of these silly accusations of copying. Let's get back to the review. Scream is one of those movies, like Halloween, that I can vividly remember watching for the first time. It was 1997, I was 16 years old, my parents and my brother were away for the weekend, and I had the house to myself. And through sheer luck, my parents had been to the video store the previous night and they'd rented Scream, on VHS no less. Ooh, that's taking me back. So I put it in. I was home alone, I was 16, and there was a film with an 18 certificate lying in wait for me to put it in. Any of you would have done the same thing. And I'll be honest, the film scared the hell out of me. Looking back though, it's amazing to think how much Scream changed the horror landscape for its time. Before Scream, the norm was for the Superman killer, or the stalker zombie. Scream pretty much reinvigorated the slasher genre and the whodunit, and it also moved away from the zombie killer. And it brought back the costume killer. Now I know this had been done before, but Scream made it cool again. And a lot of that had to go with the costume and the killer himself. He wasn't a Superman, he was a human who could be harmed, and even better, he would actually run after his victims. And in that costume, that was scary. Scream also, not to a huge degree, but it did impact on the television landscape too. Now before Scream, you had Party of Five, which I'm assuming was a big hit stateside, but it was never that really big over here. It was popular, but wasn't kind of the mainstream sort of attention that American shows these days get. Following the success of Scream though, anything Kevin Williamson had touched was greenlit, and one of the projects was Dawson's Creek. Now I'm assuming it was a hit stateside stateside because it was pretty big over here for its first few seasons. And as memory serves, the only program that really accomplished that before that was 90210. So in a way it's because of Scream that we got Dawson's Creek, which gave us this and this. But it didn't give us this.
Oh, it was... great.
So yeah, every cloud does have a silver lining. And one of the reasons I love Halloween so much, and there is a reason for me bringing this up considering Halloween appears in Scream, is that by the end of Halloween it had pretty much created 3 stars. It had Jamie Lee Curtis, she became a star through that film. It had Michael Myers, who became an icon because of that film. And in a way, although I'm not saying it didn't invent the genre, but it really put the genre on the map, the slasher genre. The slasher genre came out of Halloween leaps and bounds ahead of any other genre in the horror field because of how good that film is and how powerful that film is and how everything is done right on a really low budget. Scream also had a really low budget and it also comes away with 3 stars. By the end of Scream you've got the phone voice.
Hello, Sydney.
Which is so iconic and so scary and so chilling. You've got the ghost face mask, which, I mean, even now, over 10 years later, you can still see this mask on sale, you still see people wearing the mask on Halloween. And I always felt that Jamie Kennedy came out of this like a star.
Everybody's a suspect!
Kennedy plays Randy Meeks, a movie geek in the film. And he's so good in this role. It's his iconic role. It's the role he will always be remembered for. And it's nothing on the scale of, say, a Jack Sparrow, where Johnny Depp was born to play Jack Sparrow. And Anthony Hopkins was born to play Hannibal Lecter. And Jennifer Aniston was born to play Jennifer Aniston. It's not on the scale of that, but it's still the actor's iconic role. It's the role he will always be remembered for. And I mean, even now, in Scream circles, he's still talked about in the role because he's so good in the role. We open with one of the most famous scenes in horror history, and undoubtedly the most powerful scene in the movie, on a ringing phone, which is duly answered by Casey Becker, played by Drew Barrymore. Now, given what's about to happen in this scene, what made it so shocking and effective is that Barrymore was marketed as the star of the film. She did a lot of the press work, she was on the poster, and for all intents and purposes, now keep in mind this was before the internet was the huge spoiler machine that it is today, everyone thought she was the star of the film. She gets into a semi-flirtatious mood with the unnamed caller as she makes popcorn and discusses scary movies. This again sets the viewer off balance. While the whole killer phoning the house thing has been done before, the dialogue in this scene is interesting because it sets up that the characters are aware of horror movies. Yeah, now I know it's fairly old news these days, but back then in 1996 and 1997, it was pretty groundbreaking for a horror movie to be self-aware. And as you can imagine, the conversation doesn't stay flirtatious for long.
Why do you want to know my name?
I want to know who I'm looking at.
And then takes a downright twisted turn.
What do you want?
To see what your insides look like.
Back in 97, I was terrified watching this sequence. I'm not gonna lie. I was on my own, it was 10 in the evening, I was terrified. I'd never really seen anything like this before. But I mean, it's Drew Barrymore. She's gonna be fine. Right? The caller, who claims he's outside, reveals that he has Casey's boyfriend, Steve, tied up in the backyard. And then, in a moment I never really realised until I rewatched these films, he utters the words that will become famous to another horror franchise almost 10 years later.
I want to play a game. Then he dies right now.
The game, movie trivia. And the questions, horror.
Name the killer in Halloween.
Casey gets the warm-up question right.
Michael. Michael.
Yes, very good. Now for the real question.
No!
But for the real question...
Name the killer in Friday the 13th.
Jason! Jason! Jason!
I'm sorry, that's the wrong answer.
Uh-oh. Meaning Steve loses the game. Now, truly terrified, the killer asks her to guess which door he's at. When she can't, through sheer fear, the killer makes his presence well known and breaks through the door. Running through the house, she grabs a knife and backs into the yard while the killer stalks the house looking for her. Seeing a car's headlamps and deciding to leave her hiding spot, she chances a glance. Holy shit! But this is Drew Barrymore and she's not going to go down without a fight. A phone to the face and she's away, but then she makes the classic horror mistake. She stops running. The killer attacks and mortally wounds her, and then in a scene that can shock people even today, the killer stabs her through the throat, which destroys her vocal cords in the process. The occupants of the car turn out to be Casey's parents, but they don't notice her struggle as they enter the house, only to hear her final words on the phone she's still holding in her hands as they find her gutted and hanging from a tree just outside the house. Okay, first off, I cannot begin to express how powerful this scene was when people saw it back in 1996, 1997. I mean, it's still powerful now, but back then, the big star signing up for a film and then being killed off in the beginning or halfway through, it wasn't really done. I mean, these days it's done quite a lot. But back then, nobody expected it because Drew Barrymore was so involved with the press for the release of the film and she was marketed as the star. So to see her go right at the beginning was a hell of a shock. And it still shocks today. The only problem with this scene, and it's more of an afterthought than the scene itself, because there's nothing wrong with the scene is beautiful, but it peaks the film way too soon, because there is nothing in the film that can match this moment for its sheer intensity. That's not to say the rest of the film is bad, because it isn't, but in terms of intensity and shock, nothing can match this. But it is something that Kevin Williamson and Wes Craven learnt from and carried over into Scream 2. Moving away from Casey, we cut to Sidney Prescott, played by Neve Campbell, typing away on her keyboard. After hearing a noise outside, which she then investigates, this introduces us to Sidney's boyfriend, Billy Loomis, played by Skeet Ulrich, and a brief appearance by Sidney's father, who, we learn, will be leaving town tomorrow, meaning Sidney will be all alone for the weekend. Important plot point: Sidney is the daughter of Maureen Prescott, a woman who was found raped and murdered in her home almost exactly 1 year ago, so Sidney is understandably jumpy about certain subjects. Now, while this could have been handled in a negative way, the writing and the performance helps highlight this part about Scream that makes it stand out from the current crop of horror remakes these days. Likeable characters. And, yeah, I'll admit, they almost do fall into that pit of being the typical horror character, with the virgin, the best friend, the boyfriend, the movie geek. But they're written so well, and they're just rounded enough that they manage to avoid that cliché. For instance, you have Sidney, who begins this film as the typical horror virgin. But unlike other films where she's just a virgin because she's just not into that sort of thing, she's a virgin because she walked in on her mother's raped and bloody corpse a year earlier. Which, let's be honest, would put anyone off sex. Especially when there's stories of her mother and her sexual escapades all over town. Sidney is the heroine, and in a departure from films of today, she's likeable and you root for her. She's friendly, but not bland. She's strong, but not an ice maiden. And Campbell captures the horror spirit of the classic horror heroines like Laurie. Oh fuck no, not that one. And you support her through it. Boyfriend Billy wants sex. Sidney doesn't. And despite a puppy dog look, which for some reason doesn't work, I wonder why, Billy departs. The next day, the town of Woodsboro is awash with news coverage of the deaths of Casey and Steve. It's at school we meet Tatum, played by Rose McGowan. Going back to what I said earlier about the character dynamic in Scream, compared to the horror films of today, Tatum is another good example of the differences. Tatum, the best friend. A role in any other film, and certainly the more recent films of today, would have been a throwaway role. What fleshes her out is that unlike other films, she's not a complete bitch. She's feisty and spunky, but she really does care about Sidney. There isn't one point in this film where you see her attack Sidney or badmouth Sidney behind her back. The two have a meaningful conversation about halfway through regarding Sidney's mother, and while Tatum certainly believes the rumours, she never once hurt Sidney with this knowledge. She acts like a real person and a real friend. As the police investigate the murders, we're introduced to our principal characters: Tatum's brother, Deputy Dewey Riley, played by David Arquette, the local sheriff, the headmaster, it's the Fonz, and later we meet Tatum's complete ass, but for some reason amusing boyfriend Stu, played by Matthew Lillard, in a role that thankfully doesn't require him to go outside his acting range.
Okay, really?
Did I just say acting range? And traditional horror geek and surely dead meat, Randy Meeks, played by the aforementioned Jamie Kennedy. With the principal cast pretty much all introduced, the film sets about building tension and, are you listening to this, Platinum Films? Not relying on jump scares. Returning home, Sidney, displaying the kind of intelligence that's almost non-existent in today's horror films, decides she would rather not stay home alone in a house in the middle of nowhere and arranges with Tatum to stay with her. So Tatum says she'll pick her up after practice. With a few hours to go before Tatum arrives, Sidney falls asleep and is awoken a few hours later by a phone call from Tatum to announce she's on her way. A second phone call sparks one of the most iconic lines of the series.
Hello, Sydney.
Initially, Sidney thinks the caller is Randy, playing a prank, and plays along. But when questioned whether she likes scary movies, Sidney utters one of the greatest lines in horror, basically summing up the entire slasher genre in one sentence.
Oh, it's just, what's the point? They're all the same. Some stupid killer stalking some big-breasted girl who can't act, who's always running up the stairs when she should be going out the front door. It's insulting.
Calling the caller's bluff that he's on the front porch, she goes out to investigate and finds no body there. Bored of the conversation, she goes to hang up.
If you hang up on me, you'll die just like your mother. Do you want to die, Sydney? Your mother sure didn't.
Back inside with the door locked, Sydney's safe. Well, not really. Managing to fight off the killer, but with the door locked, in a delicious slice of irony, she does what she just claimed would be the flaw in the horror films. She runs up the stairs, managing to call the police over the internet. But the killer has disappeared, and suddenly Billy has appeared. The game's afoot, especially when Billy's phone drops to the floor. For you kids out there, let me just clarify. Back in 1996 and 1997, mobile phones weren't the essential life tool that they are today, so seeing one on the floor is a perfectly legit reason for Sydney to suspect Billy at this moment. Sydney, doing the natural thing, runs like hell. I've always liked that scene. Billy's arrested and carted off to jail while Sydney is taken in for questioning. It's here we officially meet Courtney Cox's character, Gail Weathers, and her cameraman Kenny. Weathers, a tabloid journalist who has a history with Sydney due to Sydney testifying against Cotton Weary, the man who went to jail for the rape and murder of her mother. Weathers believes Cotton to be innocent and has a book due out later in the year which details the court case. At the police station where Billy is questioned, and then kept inside until his phone records can be checked, Sydney learns that her father never checked into the hotel he told her he'd be staying at and is now missing. Leaving the station through the back entrance, Sydney is ambushed by reporters led by Gail, and, after an off-the-cuff remark,
I'll send you a copy.
Sydney doesn't seem to like that. Back at Tatum, Sydney and Tatum discuss the possibility of Billy being the killer, and in a scene which is a serious departure from the movies of today, it's a simple little scene between the two of them. Just listen to it for a moment.
Do you really think Billy did it? Was there, Tatum? He was destined to have a flaw. I knew he was too perfect.
It's a nice scene, and it really shows the softer side of Tatum's character. Now, imagine if Rob Zombie had written that scene.
What up, Dick Lickers?
Dude, suck it up, ho. We got a fucking theme going on. Don't screw it up.
Yeah. Now I don't like them as much. Things seem relatively calm, but before turning in, Sydney gets another call.
Hello, Sydney.
And to build the list of suspects, Dewey doesn't appear in the scene until the killer hangs up. Interesting.
Hello.
So at this moment, I guess we can put Dewey on the suspects list with Billy. But wait a minute. How did Gail know about Sydney's attack? And how was she on the scene in the first place? Add Gail. What about the cameraman? Add Kenny. Funny how practice ran late. But just after the attack, Tatum arrives. Add Tatum. And where is the father? After all, the costume is called Father Death. This was before he was rechristened Ghostface, by the way. Add the father too. That's quite the list of suspects. The next day at school, things really don't get any better. Dewey announces the calls didn't come from Billy's phone and that he's been released. Gail puts the spooks on Sydney by connecting the new killings with the killings of her mother, which would prove she's right about Cotton's innocence.
Do you know what that could do for my book sales?
The school is alive with pranks and gossip about Sydney's mother, leading to another attack in the women's toilets, which in turn leads to the suspension of all classes and a citywide curfew. The Fonz shows his disgust at the pranks and almost assaults two of his students with a pair of scissors. In school alone a little later, and clearly not the most popular principal, Ghostface decides that school is for chumps, and makes a meal out of the man in a kill which, I'll admit, to begin with, didn't make much sense to me, but in the grand scheme of things it's actually a really clever plot point. Back at Tatum, Sydney and Tatum discuss Sydney's mother and the possibility of Cotton being innocent and the original killer still being out there. Now this is the scene I was alluding to earlier, which seems almost non-existent in horror movies today. The characters simply sit and talk, like two normal friends would talk. There's no bad language thrown in just for the hell of it, and they're talking about something that would naturally come up given the circumstances. It's also a good scene to show Sydney's wall-breaking in her belief that Cotton killed her mother, and it shows Tatum's softer, friendlier side, as she doesn't throw all this at Sydney, but she handles it with tact and understanding. Like a friend.
Well, I mean, you can only hear that Richard Gere gerbil story so many times before you have to start believing it.
We then cut to the local video store where Stu and Randy are debating who the killer could possibly be. Randy, who has a huge crush on Sydney, points the finger at Billy, who just so happens to be there, while Stu points the finger at Sydney's father, Neil Prescott. This is another favourite scene for me as Randy, who's almost becoming the Obi-Wan of the Scream series, reels off a number of reasons why Billy should be the killer, using past horror movies like Prom Night as an example, before working himself up into a full head of steam and throwing out the ultimate cliché of the slasher genre.
There's a formula to it. A very simple formula. Everybody's a suspect.
I don't know why, but the reading of that line and his reaction after saying it always makes me laugh. Billy obviously takes exception to this, and puts the spooks on Randy, which only increases Randy's belief that Billy's the killer. Being the kids of America, Stu decides to host a party at his place to celebrate the suspension of school. Oh yeah, a huge house in the middle of nowhere? This can't end well. I've got to say though, the locations used in this film are incredible. Sydney's house, which not only looks beautiful, but it's set in an amazing location. Stu's house, exactly the same, set in the middle of nowhere, and it just looks amazing. And even Casey's house at the beginning of the movie had this great feeling and mood to it. The location scouts really did a good job with this movie. Gail and her loyal cameraman follow the kids to the party location, and along with a smitten Dewey, gets inside the house and plants a camera so she can observe it from the news van. The only problem? A 30-second delay. Tatum leaves the party and heads for the garage to fetch some beers. She must be cold. Things don't quite go according to plan though, as she finds herself sealed off and cornered by Ghostface. Initially thinking Randy's under the mask and it's a prank, she soon realises that this is a little more serious as the killer draws the knife quite literally along her arm. She does manage to avoid him for a little while, but then in one of the most stupidest moves of the movie, she tries to get out through the cat flap, which goes about as well as you'd expect.
Ooh, nasty.
And with Tatum's death and the house party guests thinning, suddenly Billy puts in an appearance, and with Stu's blessings, Sydney and Billy head up to Stu's parents' room to talk. Upstairs, Sydney confesses her fears to Billy, fears about her mother, about possibly ending up like her, and eventually decides to give in to Billy, and the pair start to have sex. Downstairs, the remaining students, which include Stu and Randy, are watching Halloween, and commenting on Jamie Lee Curtis's breasts, and the horror fact that only virgins can survive the big chase scene. Back upstairs, and then in probably one of the most quoted scenes in Scream, Randy discusses the rules of surviving a horror movie.
There are certain rules that one must abide by in order to successfully survive a horror movie. For instance, number 1, you can never have sex. Big no-no! Big no!
I'm a dead man.
Sex equals death, okay? Number 2, you can never drink or do drugs. No, the sin factor. It's a sin. It's an extension of number 1. And number 3, never, ever, ever, under any circumstances say, I'll be right back. Because you won't be back.
I'm getting another beer. You want one?
Yeah, sure.
I'll be right back.
I just love the sheer cheek of this scene. It's pretty much satirizing the whole genre, but does it in a completely respectful way, which is really hard to do. Outside in the news van on their 30-second delay, Gail and Kenny are watching the students watching Halloween. So they are watching the students in a horror film, watching a horror film. Yeah, get your head around that for a second. A few moments later, Dewey interrupts. A car's been spotted down the road, and Dewey's off to investigate and wants Gail to tag along.
You're not scared, are you?
As Gail and Dewey head off down the road, Randy gets a call in the house telling him that the principal's been found gutted and hanging from the goalposts in the football field. Far from being upset, the party clears out as the students want to get to the field before he's taken down. Principal Henry, he was much loved, ladies and gentlemen, leaving only our core characters left in the house. And this is what I meant earlier when I was saying that the principal's death seemed like a throwaway death early at the time. It was actually really clever as it clears out the party and just leaves us with our core characters. The students, loaded with alcohol, all pile into their cars and take off down the road, nearly hitting Dewey and Gail, who share a quick kiss before Dewey notices Sydney's father's car parked off the road nearby. And now, children, after fleshing out the characters, after building up the tension, after setting the rules, the shit is about to hit the fan. Back in the bedroom after sex, Sydney questions Billy about his phone call from jail, which Billy seems to take offence to, only for Ghostface to make an appearance and cut Billy from the movie. The chase is on as the now non-virgin Sydney runs through the house with Ghostface close behind. Barricading herself in a room and climbing out of the top window, she falls, landing on a speedboat cover to find Tatum's dead body lodged in the garage door. Ugh, nasty. Back inside the house, Randy is still watching Halloween, and what can only be described as one of the most insanely tense and ironic scenes ever. He keeps telling Jamie Lee Curtis that the killer is behind him. I also find it funny that Randy is played by Jamie Kennedy, and all you can hear is,
Jamie, look behind you. Look behind you.
It's an even bigger flip of the fourth wall, and I love it. Outside, Sydney climbs into the news van only to see on the monitor the killer approaching Randy. On a 30-second delay, though, we see the killer leaving Randy alive and then suddenly appearing at the van, slitting Kenny's throat in the process. Lunging forward and stabbing Sydney in the shoulder, Sydney manages to barricade herself in the van and then escape into the night, while Dewey and Gail arrive back at the house. Telling Gail to call the sheriff and lock herself away, Dewey heads into the house armed with his gun, and as he prowls the halls looking for the killer, it's almost like he's being stalked by the Halloween theme. If you've watched any of my previous videos, you'll know that Halloween is my favourite movie of all time. If you don't, now you do. But what I think is so good about this scene is that you get the Scream film being played out while the Halloween footage and score is being played over it, and it fits. Somehow it fits so well. And there's also the subtle irony that these characters are watching a horror film while they're in one as well. Outside, Gail finds blood all over the floor, and before she can contact the sheriff, she's surprised by Randy, who she knocks out with the phone. Starting up the van, only to discover blood on the windshield, she's startled by Kenny's body and then drives off the road and down an embankment after spotting Sydney standing in the middle of the street. With nowhere left to go, Sydney heads back to the house, only to find Dewey in the doorway before he collapses with a knife in his back, and Ghostface again gives chase. Sydney manages to lock herself in Dewey's van, but before she can call for help, Ghostface again attacks, and she just manages to escape. Covered in blood, completely distraught, and seriously freaked out, she holds a gun to Randy, who tries to convince her the killer's Stu, only for Stu to appear and try to convince her of the opposite.
Fuck you both!
Yeah, I'd have done the same. Inside the house locked in, Sydney's startled by the still-alive Billy, who takes her gun and opens the door, allowing Randy inside.
Stu's flipped out. He's gone mad.
We all go a little mad sometimes.
No, Billy!
So I guess Billy was the killer.
Help me, please.
Surprise, Sydney.
2 killers. I'll admit, when I first saw this, I did not see this coming. Cornered and unmasked, the killer's monologue. Okay, word of warning. The following scene may shock you. If you ever wanted to see insanity brought to life, this is the scene. Billy and Stu run through their reasons for killing Sydney's mother and for what they've been doing, which range from we're fucking insane to Sydney's mother was having sex with Billy's father, which revelation led to Billy's mother moving out and abandoning him. The final surprise being Sydney's father, with the plan being to frame the father so the only survivors are Billy and Stu. To make the plan work, though, they need to look the part and begin stabbing each other. But they have no idea the effect of a single stab because they've based all their knowledge on horror movies. Irony, ladies and gentlemen.
She said everybody dies but us. Everybody dies but us. We're gonna carry on and plan the sequel, because let's face it, baby, these days, you gotta have a sequel.
Both end up mortally wounded and bleeding buckets, but before they can actually reach for the gun to end it, they find it being held by Gail, and she's pointing it at them. Sadly, she's not as good with the gun as she is with a microphone and doesn't realise the safety's armed. But Gail's distraction allows Sydney to hide away her father and herself and call the police, turning the tables on Billy and Stu by calling them using the voice changer.
Are you alone in the house?
Bitch! You bitch! Where the fuck are you?
Stu, mortally wounded and dying, tries to keep Sydney talking while Billy literally tears the house apart trying to find her. While the conclusion of Halloween plays in the background, Sydney, wearing the Ghostface costume, stabs Billy twice with an umbrella. Interesting note about that scene. Skeet Ulrich, the actor playing Billy, when he was a young man, I think 10 years old, he had open heart surgery, so there's a part in his chest where there's a little stainless steel wire. Now, if you touch it, it causes an insane amount of pain. Now, during this scene, he's padded here, he's padded here. The stunt woman, underneath the mask, couldn't see because of the mask. So when you see this reaction, that's 100% real. Now, apparently really dead, Stu takes some offence to the death of his partner in crime and tackles Sydney, but that doesn't go very well for him, and he ends up getting up close and personal with Jamie Lee Curtis. Goodbye, Stu. Both killers are dead and Sydney can finally relax, only to get a scare from Randy, who despite a gunshot to the shoulder is still alive.
Oh my god, Randy, I thought you were dead.
I probably should be. I never thought I'd be so happy to be a virgin.
But, not to be outdone, Billy is still alive and tries to strangle Sydney, leading to one of those moments that makes even me cringe. Sydney sticks her finger into Billy's stab wound. Ooh. He raises a knife and brings it down, but is shot by Gail, who finally turned the safety off.
Guess I remember the safety that time, you bastard.
Now, seeing as this guy has managed to come back in one film more times than Jigsaw did during the entire Saw franchise, Sydney makes doubly sure he's dead this time and shoots him in the head. Happy anniversary, bitch. And the film ends with Gail ignoring Dewey as he's wheeled away alive in an ambulance, reporting on the killings and closing the story. And that's the first Scream. Now, a lot of people are probably going to agree or disagree. Again, completely entitled to that. But there's a reason this is one of my favourite films and favourite film series. And when you look at this film and then look at the current crop of horror movies or remakes that have come out recently, you can see what the problem with these films and why they don't succeed. There is no likeable characters in those films. You just can't wait for them to get killed off because they're so annoying. Scream has likeable characters, characters you care about, characters you want to survive. Not all of them, you know, and there's some people out there who are probably on the other side and can't wait for them all to die. But the majority of people care about these characters and you want them to survive. The story is really good and really builds well through the whole film. There's a point to it, as opposed to just hack, hack, slash, slash, kill, kill. The script is sparkling. It's got some great, great one-liners and a great satirical view on the whole horror genre. But that was Scream 1. Scream 2 finds our heroes. Hello?
Hello, Welshy.
Sad Panda.
Welcome to die.